Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Kasashi, and in the previous video I talked about how I'm using the sticky note method to get through reading the Bible. The first book that I picked was the book of Esther, and if you haven't read it, please, I highly encourage you to read the book of Esther for yourself. It's such a powerful book. There are many lessons that you can draw from it, and that's what we are going to discuss today. One of the first things that you encounter when you read the book of Esther is the fact that you will not hear the name of God mentioned at any point, but after reading the entire book, you can clearly see the hand of God throughout the book. So I just found that quite interesting, that you will not necessarily see the name, the actual name of God, or you not even hear God speaking in any way, like through a prophet or through a messenger. It's actually quite interesting. Another lesson that I picked from the book of Esther is how that even before all the events happened later on, when Esther prayed and fasted and deliverance came from the Jews, I noticed that God actually answered the prayer of Esther way before she even prayed, way before she even knew the reason why she was made queen. I discovered that God actually sets things in a way that by the time you are praying, He's already been working on the answers to your prayer for years or for months or for weeks. Because we see that Esther was praying and fasting for God to protect and preserve the lives of the Jews, when in actuality, God already started doing that by making her queen. And we see that from the words of Mordecai when he was telling Esther to go and stand before the king. Mordecai uses the words, what if God brought you, like what if you are brought here for such a time as this? He literally points out the fact that Esther being queen is not a coincidence. It's not just something that happened, but it is a timely event. And so it's just one of those eye-opening things that, look, sometimes you are praying, sometimes you're seeking God, sometimes you feel like, now that I've opened my mouth, God has to start constructing and putting answers together to figure out the solution to my problem. When in actuality, many of the problems that we have, God already started answering them. He's just waiting for us to partner with Him in faith. The other lesson that I learned is that it doesn't matter what the enemy does, God's power and God's hand is able to turn what the enemy does for evil and make it happen for our good. Because we see that Haman came up with this idea of a gallows so that he can hang Mordecai on the gallows, but he ended up being the one who was hung on the gallows instead of Mordecai. And even the plot to kill the Jews, what ended up happening was that the Jews ended up killing and getting rid of their enemies. That's one lesson. Another lesson I picked out was that prayer and fasting aligns us with God's will. Like I had mentioned earlier on, when we are praying, we feel like sometimes God is answering immediately after we pray. But now I started to see prayer and fasting as a tool to align us with what God has already started doing. As opposed to feeling like fasting or praying is that thing that bends the hand of God, I realized that prayer and fasting is what bends me to align me as an individual to the will of God. Because we see Esther is encouraging all the Jews and she's fasting with her women. She's encouraging all of them to pray and fast for her, and she goes before the king. But God already answered Esther's prayer way before by making her queen. But that prayer and fasting helped prepare her to go before the king. So God will use prayer and fasting to align us with His will, to remove unbelief, to remove the things that hinder us from seeing the working of God. Another lesson I picked out is that God rewards faithfulness. God rewards people who are holy, who choose to not bend to the things of this world. Because we see Mordecai had been taken captive. He was in a foreign land. Even if he did what the king had instructed by bending or bowing down to Haman, no one would really judge him, because first of all, he's in a foreign land, they've been taken captive, and secondly, it's been decreed that everybody should bow down before Haman. But we see Mordecai was faithful to the laws of God, and he only chose to bow down to God and not to man. And even when his life was threatened, we see that God rescued him in a dynamic way. I also learned that God never runs out of government officials and rulers, and that He saves us so that many can be saved, because later on we see that people became Jews just because of how God saved the Jews. The last lesson that I can talk about is God's silence is not equivalent to His absence. What do I mean? Just because it seems like God is not working, that doesn't mean that God is quiet. He is working in the background. So if you feel like you're going through a situation where you've been praying, you've been seeking God, and it feels like nothing is working, please do not be discouraged. Please do not feel like God is not working, because as we've learned from the story of Esther, God is working. He's just working in a big and dynamic way. And just pray and fast to align yourself with God's will. So I've still continued with the sticky note method. This is me just picking a new book to read. And so the book that I picked is the book of Zephaniah. So I will see you in the next video for a summary of the book of Zephaniah. Love you. Bye and God bless.